Roger Stewart spent a 30-year career at Proctor Gamble, where he provided financial analysis on brands such as Pampers, Love's, Charmin, Bounty, Always, etc. He spent the last 18 years of his career in Treasury and retired as the Vice President of Global Treasury in 2005. Upon retirement from P&G, he returned to Purdue, where he taught international finance and capital markets in the MBA program. From 2009 to 2013, he was the executive director of Krach's Graduate and Undergraduate Career Center, which is now the Krach Leadership Professional Development Center. As an executive in residence, he also advised a number of Purdue's top honorary and leadership organizations, Motorboard, Old Masters, and Rising Professionals, until 2018. Today, Roger's passion is Purdue's Leadership and Professional Development Department, LEAD, that is our department, and Roger is a diehard Boilermaker. He enjoys travel, spending time with friends and family, and continuing the honor of helping young professionals achieve their goals, like yourselves. So without further ado, Roger Stewart, thank you.
Thank you. It's really an honor to speak here in front of all of you. A nice turnout, even for cold weather. Shorts and short sleeve shirts.
I got a hoodie that I'm just not wearing.
I was going to say, I don't know whether you're even smart enough to get into IU. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this opportunity to talking to you about communications. And this area of professional development is an absolute passion for me. All my friends get sick and tired of hearing me talking about it. It just comes up all the time because I believe it's so important. And I think it's really a great opportunity here at Purdue, because if you get out of Purdue, there is no doubt you've got the technical abilities and the work ethic to be successful in business. But by comparison to where we ought to be in the area of these professional development, that is an opportunity for us. So, as Eileen said, we're working 4 broad areas for that. Boilermakers are communicators, they're collaborators. That means they know how to work in a diverse environment, they know how to work in teams. They're thinkers. That doesn't just mean they get to the right answer, it means they can communicate what all of these numbers mean, they think strategically, they look out front. And they're self-aware. They have ways to continuously learn throughout their careers and be aware of the surroundings in that. So think of it this way. Boilermakers are communicators, collaborators, thinkers, and self-aware. Okay? And we're going to be talking about communications today. All 4 of the areas are important, but you likely can't demonstrate the other 3 without the ability to communicate proficiently. In 2019, there was a survey of hiring firms, and we compared their responses to questions, not we, the National Associations of Colleges and Employers, performed a survey and asked students questions and asked hiring firms questions. Of the hiring firms, percent of employers that rated their recent grads proficient in oral and written communications. In other words, as they hired people coming out of colleges and universities, 79%, pardon me, oh, I blew my line. Students thought they were 79% proficient in the ability to communicate both orally and verbally, or orally and written. What do you think the employer said? Students said 79%. What did the employer say?
40.
Good guess, 42%. Think about that. That's really scary. And there, on all of these areas in professional development, the separation was nearly that significant in all of them. In, which one was it? Critical thinking, students 80%, employers 56%. The only area where the employers rated students higher than the students rated themselves, technical skills. Take it as a sign. Working on communicating, collaborating, thinking, and being self-aware If you can grow just marginally in that while you're at Purdue, it's going to give you a huge leg up as you go out in your careers and work both personally and professionally, and also too about your life here on campus. Okay, as Eileen mentioned, there are 5 broad areas to think about in communications: verbal, written, nonverbal, body language, listening and observing. Can you figure out what's going on? And can you summarize and distill information that you've heard? And let me talk a little bit about each of those. So, 90% of the, well, a significant percentage of the time, when you meet somebody from a hiring firm, when you meet people on your team in the classroom, or when you work with other students in extracurricular activities, verbal skills are going to typically be the first impression. Okay? And how many times have you met somebody that walked in a room and they were hesitant? And you were kind of concerned about them? Or were you hesitant when you walked in a room? Think about what impression that leaves with the others there. So as you're thinking about talking and your body language, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, being confident is really important. And it shows. And it impacts the willingness of people to be willing to listen to you. Are you aware? And this is broadly speaking. If you're talking to somebody in a firm for an interview, if you're a host with Old Masters or Rising Professionals, do you know about the people you're working with so that you can communicate on their level what you would like to bring across to them? You'll be able to communicate better, plus you will impress them more if you're aware of what's going on. The other thing, if you're meeting with people, if it's in your groups, if it is at an interview situation, if it is in a dinner with hiring firms, whatever the case might be, do you have the knowledge of the area of interest to impress that person? Okay? And it doesn't take a whole lot. Just think about if you're working in one of your groups and somebody in that group knows something about you or something about the team or has some information on what you ought to be working. When that happens, think how much that impresses you about that person coming into the room. If you're interviewing a firm and you know a whole lot about that firm, that impresses them. That makes them think, number one, it plays to their ego. Everybody that's working at a company is proud of where they're working. And so if you know about the firm, you're playing to their ego. And then by the same token, then you're showing an interest in them as a hiring firm. Okay? Any questions, comments on this? All right. Written communications. It really it demonstrates professionalism as much as anything else. When you send out an email or a letter, a Word document, if it's not spaced correctly, if it has a funny font, it sends a message to the people that are reading your documentation. And that could be a faculty member, it could be a fellow student, it could be a hiring firm, it could be your boss in your summer internship. So probably more than any area in this, written communications demonstrate your professionalism. a little bit about my background. As Eileen said, I was in Procter Gamble for 30 years, and P&G is known, or at least was known back then, for all decisions being made via written communications. And you want to talk about anal? That's what P&G was like. If you sent a memo up and it had one sentence on the second page and hadn't been incorporated on the first page, the memo got sent back. If you had a memo with a typo, the memo got sent back. Every proposal in the firm had to be written the same way. It had to be, this is what I'm proposing, this is who I've talked to about it, here's some background on what's going on and where we're trying to think about this, here are the alternatives I considered, here's what the right answer is, and here are the next steps. Now you might say, oh my golly, that's really confining. I'm going to go to work for a small firm. But I got to tell you, after 30 years of that, it really forced me to sit down and think as I am making business decisions. One of the former CFOs who is a dear personal friend of mine, and I worked for him right up until I retired, he said, you know, Roger, even if we are buying Gillette for $55 billion, when I think about buying the Gillette business, I start writing the memo in my mind. So it is really important to be able to think through how you are right and put things down. Now, that kind of gets to how you're organized. Now, you don't all have to do your memos like I grew up in P&G, but your written memos will demonstrate a lot about your thinking, and that will say something to the hiring firm. Readers are lazy, and I am particularly lazy. When you send out a letter, if it has, for example, a paragraph that's a half page long, it makes me tired. I'm not going to read this. You know, I've got 10 other cover letters to read today, or 50 other cover letters. I am not going to walk my way through a half page paragraph. So how I coach students is to do this. Write your memo with just 2, 3, or 4 sentence paragraphs. It doesn't look like they have to climb a mountain to read them. Secondly, make every sentence be, this is what I'm going to tell you about in this paragraph, and then later tell them. So you could say, I demonstrated a great leadership experience while I was at Purdue by being the president of my sorority house. While we were there, we increased membership from 50 to 100, and for the first time in 10 years, we balanced the budget. Now think about that. If they don't get all the specifics on the data, you'd like for them to, but if they read the first sentence in your paragraph, you made your point. I have demonstrated leadership experience from my time at Purdue. Okay? Final point on written communication. Be persuasive. Don't be tentative. Don't be too bold. Don't have a big ego, but make certain you state the facts and you demonstrate that what you're trying to bring across to people is important, it's correct, and you truly believe in it. Okay? That's written communication. Nonverbal communication. I always like to say this. You are always on stage. Another guy that has done a lot of career coaching, he and I have bounced students back before and talk about it. He describes it as every day is an interview. I work for a large firm. Every year we rated all the levels within the organization. Top 10%, next 25%, next 25%. The bottom 5% we ought to be considering asking to leave the company. There are always bubbles when you go through and do that. Okay? And there may be, when we evaluated all the director levels around the globe right before I retired, there were 25 vice presidents in the room. And so we would get to the point it's a bubble, and we'd have too many people by one in the top 15%. Okay? Now then, if John Doe had a very professional meeting with 2 or 3 of the voters, but Jane Doe went to a meeting and fell asleep in front of one of those people, who do you think bubbled up and who do you think bubbled down? It's real easy, isn't it? Every day's an interview. You're always on stage. So, in nonverbal communications, are you professional? Do you sit up? Is your clothing, is your dress in line with the people that you're talking to? Notice I didn't say wear a tux to the interview or a formal. But is your clothing appropriate and does it look professional? When in doubt, one step up. For men, if it is a pressed shirt, firm, pressed shirt, when in doubt, wear a sport coat without a tie. Go one level above what you think it is. Don't go one level below. Okay? Act like you care. Lean up in your seat. Show an interest in what people are doing, or what they're saying, or what you're talking about. And also, too, once again, when you communicate, be persuasive. Now then, you want to keep on top of the person on the other side of the desk, or you want to keep on top of what the audience is like. I go to a real large church in Chicago, and we got a new pastor about 7 or 8 years ago, and it used to be her predecessor turned the lights down over the pews and then just had the light on him. And I'll always remember this. Shannon said, I want to leave the lights on because I want to read you while I'm preaching to see if I'm making my point. And I'll bet all of you do the same thing I'm doing right this minute. I'm looking around the room and seeing if you're making eye contact with me, if you're nodding off, if you're making notes. So not only what that does, it helps you understand whether or not you're being persuasive enough, you're bringing your points across by reading what the other people have to say. Okay? And then you can adjust. If there's an issue, you can think about, well, everybody's got a blank stare on their face. Should I try explaining this again? Okay? So I believe that's really important. It's a skill to pick up, and practice it with your teams. All right? Or practice it when you're making presentations in class. Listening and observing. I coach students to network with firms and to find firms that have Purdue alumni in them. And then to go on LinkedIn and not just ask to connect like you've got 10 connection requests going out, but say, I am interested in a role in corporate finance. Would you be willing to talk career with me for 15 minutes by phone? Okay? And if you ever want to talk networking or growing in this area, get a hold of Stephanie or Eileen or somebody, and they can give you my email and we can talk about it. But it brings me to these key points. All of us like to talk about ourselves. So if you are networking with somebody at a firm, or you are fortunate enough to get an on-site interview and you're out for dinner, or if you're in a reception with an old master or a faculty member or something like that, begin practicing your questions to ask them about themselves. How'd you pick Purdue? Why did you decide to go into consulting? Why Deloitte? What roles have you had? In 2020 hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently? Where do you see your career going? Everybody loves answering those questions. It makes them feel important. But also think about this. If you're going to interview with that company, or if it's an old master or a on-campus business and executive in resident, or whatever the case might be, you want to know more about them, and that way you're going to get information, okay? Now then, I'm having a conversation with you. Now this, I find this to be one of the most challenging things. You want to keep the conversation going. So your counterpart is answering your question, and you want to pay attention. You don't want it look like your mind is going off, or you don't want to have them answer a question and you didn't hear it and you ask the same darn thing 5 minutes later. But think about when somebody is talking to you, what is your next question? I would have a list of questions that I would typically use and then be prepared to bring it up. But on the other hand, if you're talking with somebody that's sharing information about their career, what's going on at their firm, or whatever, don't hesitate to ask them a question about their answer. It shows you're interested in them. Also, what the heck, you might be learning something, okay? And so that is what I think about when I think about listen and observe. Making myself smarter, but also at the same time making the person that I'm talking to feel more important, okay? As I coach, summarize and distill information, if there is ever an area that gets under my skin in communications with kindergartners to elderly people like me, this is it. And what I mean by that is two broad areas. First, when you're answering a question, whether it's an interview question or somebody wants to know something about you or somebody wants to know when the next team meeting is, hesitate for just a minute and think, where do I want this conversation to end? What is the key point I want to make? And get there. Okay? It's not like, well, you know, we usually meet on Tuesday nights and we've been bouncing around a lot, and my team, sometimes people show up and sometimes they don't, but when we do meet, we meet in the second floor of the co-rec. Nobody's that stupid in this room, but that we have a tendency to provide too much information. What information can I give somebody that answers the question, gives them all the data they need, and that's it? Similarly, when you are in interview, here's what I tell students. If you are asked a question and it takes you twice as long to answer it as you should, you've missed the opportunity to share another 100% of what you'd like to talk about yourself. Think about it for a minute. If it takes you twice as long to answer a question as it should, you've missed an opportunity to share a bunch of stuff about yourself in the 25 minutes when they interview you. And the other thing is, this is key, that my top point here. The difference between making senior level management and middle management is your ability to communicate. I grew up in finance. Anybody can run a net present value. Anybody can run a rate of return. Anybody can run Excel spreadsheets. People that can do that are a dime a dozen. But the difference between the people that are successful and those that are only marginally successful are the people who say, this is what are important in these numbers. Mr. or Ms. General Manager, this proposal is a go at this point. But what you need to know when you manage this project, if you short ship by 5%, the project falls out of bed. So that is where you ought to be focusing yourself, okay? That is what a good communicator can do, and that's the difference between becoming a vice president of finance in a firm and being a director in a firm and responsible for pulling all the numbers together. And that ties in with thinking in the area of Boilermakers are communicators, collaborators, thinkers, and self-aware. If somebody asks you a question and you've not thought about your answer to that, back to this point, pause just a second and do what I said before. Think about where you want this to end up. Happens all the time. What have you done while you're at Purdue? People haven't thought through the answer to that. And it goes on and on and on and on. It takes 5 minutes. If I'm interviewing them, I go to sleep. I'm tired. You know, I'm not interested any longer. But if they come in and they say, I decided I wanted to be in engineering, and I came here, and after 2 or 3 semesters, I decided chemical engineering was my choice over mechanical, and here's why. And I was involved in my sorority, and I became president, and we raised $5,000 for this project, and I had this summer internship, and I'm looking for a career in research with a pharmaceutical firm. If I'm a recruiter, that's self-awareness. That's the ability to communicate. That's the ability to be persuasive. And oh, by the way, you didn't bore me and put me to sleep. Okay? So, 4 broad areas: communicating, collaborating, thinking, and self-aware. Communications, if I can say anything, is practice listening and think about how you can, every sentence you make, every paragraph you write, how can you make it the most efficient and persuasive? The hardest thing to do is to write a 5-page paper rather than a 10-page paper. And I bet a lot of you have experienced that while you're here on campus. And that goes back to my career at P&G. 1-page memo. You want to propose making Charmin go out in 6 rolls instead of 4? 1 page. If you can't get it across in 1 page, we're not interested in talking about it. All right? It's been my pleasure to talk to you.